Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Vanessa and I'm an author from Toronto, Canada, and I publish under the pen name A and Sage. I write fantasy, mystery, gothics, romantasy now, gothic romantasy, pretty much a whole bunch of genres. And what I'd like to do on this channel is kind of share with you guys everything that I have learned after having published over 25 books now and counting, and having been both indie and traditionally published. Pretty much everything that sparks my fancy. I like to share with everybody here because I think that should not be any gatekeeping in publishing. We are all learning. Things change every single day. And so if I can help kind of impart some knowledge, or if I discover a cool tool that I think you guys might appreciate, then I would love to share it with everybody because I think we can all enjoy from the same things. And so if that sounds like something that you want to be a part of, then make sure that you are subscribed and that you hit the bell notification so you don't miss any upcoming videos. Now, we have a fun video today. I do, as always, have my phone because I make notes. And so I wanted to talk about something that I think is really interesting. And I wanted to talk about fairy tale retelling. So if you don't know, I am kind of like in the background. I have a project that's always simmering. It's usually like one or two projects that I pick, that I work on when I'm not working on the books that I am contracted to do by my publisher. And this time I'm working on a thriller, but the thriller has a bit of a twist because it's actually like a loose retelling of Hansel and Gretel. So it is a thriller. It has some supernatural nods, but it's not a supernatural thriller. And so it's got that like Hansel and Gretel kind of feel to it because we are dealing with like a brother and a sister. They're twins. And the brother went missing when they were kids and supposedly is deceased. However, we very quickly at the beginning of the book discovered that that may not be the case, and thus unravels the plot. And we've got more knots to the fairy tale that goes along. And I'm having a lot of times like plotting, writing this, working on it, world building, doing all of that. And so I kind of wanted to talk about fairy tale retellings because I've seen authors online talk about fairy tale retellings, saying what makes for a good one, what a fairy tale retelling really is, where do you draw the line between the retelling and a fan copy. And so I kind of wanted to discuss about like what my tips are and what my idea is of what a fairy retelling is. So essentially a fairy retelling is when you take a fairy tale that that people are familiar with. It doesn't have to be most people because there's fairy tales all over the world from different cultures. But you take a fairy tale that is known by a larger mass of people and you retell it in a way that kind of puts a spin on it. Now you have to be careful when you're doing this because there are still some fairy tales that are fairly fresh and do not allow for the copyright for a retelling. So just do your research before that. I am not a lawyer. I'm not telling you any advice on that part, but I would check if the fairy tale you want to retell is actually in the open domain for public use. So just putting that out there. And so a fairy tale retelling is basically that. You're taking a fairy tale, you're taking a tale that already exists and you're spinning it on its axis to make it something fresh. You're retelling it. Now, I will preface this and say that if you are not on my Substack yet, if you're not on there, then make sure you head over to my Substack. The link is in the description because if you want to see these tips and a couple more extra ones in written format, I did also drop a post on there, like a blog post, an article post, whatever, a Substack post on there with these tips and some of my notes on it, and a couple more like little extra bits. So make sure you check that out. If you're not familiar with my Substack, I have a Substack. I give out mini courses every single month in the form of a newsletter. The courses are on topics that the community picks. So if you are subscribed to the Substack on like the lowest tier that Substack allows you to subscribe on, then you get to pick what we talk about and what the course will be about. And I give you usually like a very detailed like a full mini course, anywhere between 4,000 to 7,000 words, which is quite a bit. It's a lot of work. But I do like to do these because I think it's fun that we all pick the topic that we want to learn about more. And it gives me the opportunity to do like a ton of research, but also like impart information I already know in a concise manner. So that's a Substack spiel, but now back to retelling. So the first tip that I have is choose your core tale wisely. Now, it might be very alluring to pick a fairy tale like Beauty and the Beast, you know, Little Red Riding Hood, all that stuff, things that are like worldwide familiar. But consider some of the smaller fairy tales that are out there. And I would look at sources outside of the Western world or wherever you are. I'm saying Western because I'm living in Canada. But I would pick sources that are outside of your kind of comfort zone. So I do have I guess like a folklore inspired, somewhat of a fairy tale. It's really retelling vibes to it. So The Dead We Keep is actually a fairy tale-ish retelling. It is folklore inspired. It is inspired by the tale of the goddess of death. It is a Slavic folklore that has been around for like ages. In some areas of Eastern Europe, there is a celebration every spring that puts away the goddess of winter and death. And there's like a whole bunch of stuff on it. Now, it is more obscure. Most people don't know it. I had to do research in multiple languages in order to develop this story. And that made it not only interesting for me, but it helped me provide a fresh spin on it. And it helped me kind of bring this core fairy tale that is very familiar to some people, but not familiar to others, into a more general public. Speaking of The Dead We Keep, I actually realized that I want to show off. So I got my special edition. My publisher actually created a special edition for this book, and you can order it. Again, the link will be here in the description, but let me go get it because I think I peed my pants a little bit when I got it because it's beautiful. So let me go grab it and then we can show it off really quickly. Okay, I'm back and I got it. And so this is my folklore fairy tale inspired. This is a standalone. It's for a young adult audience based on Morzana, the goddess of death and winter. But can we just look at the foiling on this? I am just so amazed. And we've got like foil on the back and then the edges. So snakes play a really big part in this book. I used a lot of the symbols for the goddess of winter and death throughout the book. The horseshoe, there is like a rabbit foot in there. We've got on the cover a little scarf that the main character that Nastia wears around her neck all the time. But I wanted to do like a red snake skin for the edges, and it's so beautiful. Poppies are obviously a big thing. And then when you open it, you've got the printed gorgeous end pages. There's a ribbon. Let me show you the cover of the book. So we've got like the end pages there, and that's the cover of the book. And the best part is this one. So we got like the quote, "We are all of the river" on the front. And the best part of all of this is all the chapters. I have to back it up so that it doesn't get too blown out by the lights. But all the chapters have this absolutely stunning, gorgeous illustration, and they're all in color. So all the chapters have color illustrations throughout. So I just had to show off because I just got it and I was like squealing. I'm so excited. It's so nice. But back to the tips. Sorry for the interruption. I'm just very, very excited. Okay, so the next tip for writing your own fairy tale retelling is you want to decide like what to keep, what to twist, and what to toss. So these are decisions that you get to make when you're retelling a fairy tale. So if you have a fairy tale that you read as a child and you did not particularly enjoy certain things, get rid of them, right? So you want to figure out like what are you keeping from the original fairy tale? And this is where plotting kind of really helps at the beginning. So think of what you're going to keep from the original fairy tale. Then think about what twists you're going to do. So like, is the villain actually the hero? Or do we have are you switching gender roles maybe? Things like that. So see what you can twist around and change from the original one. So that's kind of like where the twist would come. And then what to toss, right? Like feel free to get rid of things that don't work for your particular version of the fairy tale. And more than that, feel free to get rid of things that are problematic, because a lot of fairy tales were written in, the olden days, and things were not quite as friendly to everybody or inclusive of everybody. And that includes gender roles too. People were not portrayed in the best light a lot of times. Different cultures were not portrayed well in all of these. So feel free to get rid of the stuff that makes the fairy tale problematic and write it in a fresh new light that actually works with the world we live in today. Like, why not? Then the next tip is the setting. So setting is key. So I think when we're thinking about, and I'm going to talk about some of these. So when we're thinking about a fairy tale retelling, the most important things I would say are obviously the characters, the setting, and I think the most important thing for a fairy tale is the theme. And we're going to get to theme in a bit, but let's talk about the setting. Try to create a setting that is unique from what the original fairy tale was. So a really great example of this is the Lunar Chronicle. So if you haven't read it, Marissa Meyer wrote fairy tale retellings. It's a four plus some in between half books, novellas. But they are all fairy tale retelling. Every single book follows a different fairy tale. So the first one we start with is Cinderella. And she completely twisted Cinderella by using a different setting. The setting that Marissa chose for her Lunar Chronicles retelling was a sci-fi. It's a sci-fi space opera adventure, right? Cinder doesn't have a glass slipper. She has a robotic leg. Like, it's just, everything is completely twisted, right? And the setting, because it was so vivid and uniquely built and so lush, really made you think of this as a whole new story, even though it is very much a Cinderella retelling. So try to build a setting that is not what you might expect by reading the original fairy tale, right? Like maybe you have a steampunk setting, maybe you turn your fairy tale into like a lot of times what you see. I've seen this more so with movies, is it's got more of like a horror aspect. Like there's been quite a few of Hansel and Gretel retellings where they're like monster hunters, and it's more like horror-esque and dark, which is really, really cool, right? So twist the setting around. And then the next thing I mentioned that is very important, obviously, is the characters, right? You want to deepen your characters. Fairy tales, because they were originally, a lot of them were made as like, well, they were supposed to be for adults, but then they started being used as life lessons for children. And because of that, the characters were not necessarily deep, and a lot of them were very much two-dimensional, right? The hero or heroine always wanted a happy ending, the villain was bad for no good reason. They were just bad, whoever the knight in shining armor was pretty two-dimensional and had zero personality, right? They were brave. So feel free to scrap that, put that in the toss pile, and really deepen your characters. Figure out why your villain is bad. Give them a backstory. Take a look at your actual hero or heroine. What do they really want except a happy ending? Like, is there something they truly want out of life? Give them that. Make your characters believable and make them more human. Make them step off the page and not be somebody in a fairy tale. A really, really fun example that's like a spoof on a fairy tale is The Princess Bride. And the characters there, both outside of the fairy tale, the kid and the grandfather, and the characters in the fairy tale, they were done in such a way that, yes, they were, it almost made fun of the two-dimensional character by giving them dimensions but still pretending that they have no dimension, if you know what I mean, right? Everything was a caricature of what a fairy tale is. By doing so, because it was done in a comedic way, it gave the characters a lot of depth, and it gave them an arc for every single one. Like, everybody had a reason to be what they were, and so give that to your characters. Don't leave them hanging. Then you want to raise the stakes, right? That's a really important thing I think you want to do, because in fairy tales, the stakes are usually, again, much like the characters, kind of two-dimensional, right? The stakes are all or nothing. They're black and white. Raise those stakes. change them around. Like what happens if the curse is broken, right? Maybe if you break the, maybe if the hero or heroine survives, if they are saved somehow, maybe 1,000 or 1,000,000 people die 10 years from now, maybe breaking the curse will actually destroy an entire world. What if the hero wants to be cursed, right? Things like that. So try to raise the stakes, not just for your characters, but for your world, and see how anything that might have happened in the real fairy tale, what effect it would have on the world that you are currently building. And then we're getting to the one that I feel is like really, really important, which is theme. So a lot of times, and this is the reason why I feel like theme is super important for this. A lot of times, if I read, like I talk to people who have read retellings, some of the criticism that I hear is, especially with like when I'm working with authors on creating their own books, some of the criticisms that I hear is that they read a fairy tale retelling and they say that there's nothing new, which is actually my next point, which is blending familiarity with originality, and we'll get back to that in a second. But there's nothing new, and they feel like it was like literally like a direct retelling of the fairy tale. And I think that happens a lot of time in books is because we didn't look at themes quite enough, right? We didn't deconstruct what the theme of the original fairy tale was. So let's take like Little Red Riding Hood as an example, right? So you might have Little Red Riding Hood, and a lot of the retellings you see for Little Red Riding Hood and things like that, Beauty and the Beast, all of that are in romance, right? So let's pretend that you're writing Little Red Riding Hood, and you are writing a romance, and the wolf is a werewolf. This is pretty classic retelling, but it's a werewolf and the girl, and it's a romance, a dark romance, whatever it might be, between the two, right? And you would retell it, kind of throw them in the modern world, and he might be a mafia boss. What is this book we're writing? So the werewolf is a mafia boss, and she gets captured, and then they fall in love and blah, 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 right? So she gets captured because she's trying to save, like her sister or her mother or whoever, replace the grandma, because mob bosses probably aren't kidnapping grandmas as far as I know, but like a sister or friend or a neighbor, let's say, and just try to save it from the mob, and gets captured, they fall in love, blah, 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 things happen. So if you write it as is like that, it's pretty, that's Little Red Riding Hood down to the core, right? You've got like a wolf, her saving, etc. Literally the exact same thing, except the only twist you've added is that, they fall in love. And maybe you want to go a step further and she takes over the mob, but take a look at themes, right? You can't really have a Little Red Riding Hood retelling and calling a retelling unless your pacing, for example, exemplifies that pacing of a hunt. The entire book should have the pacing of a hunt, right? It should be hard-hitting. It should have elements of fear in it. There should be always some kind of like overshadowing darkness, like on the horizon, on the corner. It should the play with the theme of not feeling safe. There's like the theme of abandonment. Look at all of these. These are the themes that are very much present in the fairy tale of Little Red Riding Hood. Take those themes, pluck them out, deepen them, really dive into them, and then throw them in your retelling. And I can guarantee you that it will no longer read like a word-for-word copy of the actual Little Red Riding Hood. It will feel like its own story, completely surrounded by its own world, its own lore, its own people. Just take the themes and throw and make them larger and throw them into your book, and you will see what the difference will make pretty much immediately. And then my last point that I kind of like touched upon is blending on familiarity, but also adding a lot of originality. So that's the other way that obviously you want to keep some of those core elements, So let's say in my retelling that I am working on, I am keeping, the brother and sister element, the Hansel and Gretel element. I am actually putting direct nods to like the witch in the woods and the house in there. But it's going to be like games that kids play to scare each other, except for the one night that the main character's brother disappeared and is pronounced dead because they dare each other to go to this witch's house, and the brother does not make it out of the woods. And so that's familiar, right? That's very much, the Hansel and Gretel story. Somebody gets taken by the witch. However, the originality part of it, the part of it that is not in the story, is that what if that someone didn't survive? Like the brother doesn't survive, right? And then what happens if the brother does survive, but no longer recognizes you, doesn't know who you are, and you are not even sure if what you saw is real? And so we have this like very unreliable narrator in Gretel as well, right? Who then goes back and has to confront this like wicked house in the woods and the witch and all of those feelings that go with it and the world that goes with it, to realize that the wickedness was not the witch at all, but the wickedness was within her and her brother. It's gonna be like a twist and then some originality. The setting will be very, very different. The themes that I'm using are going to add to that originality and take away from the familiarity of the book. I'm going to have a lot of themes of like missing kids, and it's going to be a lot darker and very like thriller type setting. There's going to be twists upon twists, to take and so it's going to cut that familiarity right at the beginning. So you're going to have the familiarity kind of like brewing throughout with those supernatural elements, nods to the supernatural elements. The familiarity is the brother and sister, the mention of the witch, the idea of the witch and the house in the woods. And that's where it ends, right? And the rest of the story takes over. However, the thing that's going to stay throughout is the theme, right? The theme of lost children. The theme of feeling afraid and being alone, the theme of depending on family, and then what happens if that bond is broken, right? Things like that, right? So like that's kind of like where I'm taking this story, to take the familiarity out and bring something that's more original to it. And that's about like all the tips that I have for you today. I think if you're working on your own fairy tale retelling, take a look at some of these and see if you're doing them already in your book, then that's great. But if you're not, see how you can play with them. Also, if you are working on a fairy tale retelling, I would love to know which fairy tale you're working on. I always I research fairy tales like insanely. I'm obsessed with them. I've been reading them for ages and ages, and looking at research and all the deconstruction of it and case studies and everything. So I'd love to know what fairy tale you are working on. Definitely let me know in the comments. And as I always say, if you have something you want me to make a video on, then make sure you drop that in the comments as well. If you are a subscriber already, then you absolutely rock my little socks off. And if you're not and you want to subscribe, if you stuck around this long and you want to hear me like kind of babble about writing and books and fun stuff and sometimes planners and reading and everything that's out there, then make sure that you are subscribed. And I will leave you with that because I have a ton of stuff to do. So I'm going to go and do it. And as always, I hope you stay magical, and I will see you next week for another video. Bye.